Hello everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. Brooklyn never sleeps. It just hums, and in that noise lives Aria Keller, a woman who's mastered the art of holding her life together with coffee and sarcasm. One rainy night, her little brother sneaks out to explore a black car parked down the street. Cute, right? Except that car belongs to Leo Draven, a man whose smile looks like a warning label. When he shows up at her door, rain dripping off his coat, he simply says, "He hid in my car. You owe me now." And just like that, Aria's quiet, carefully built world unravels. One heartbeat, one secret, one impossible man at a time. Brooklyn at night always sounded like it was running late. Trains rumbled somewhere under the street, somebody argued 3 floors up, and rain tapped impatiently on the windows like it wanted in on the drama. Aria Keller was used to the noise. It filled the spaces where grief used to live. 27, caffeine-powered, and only slightly falling apart. She'd become an expert at pretending her life was fine. Fine-ish. Her mornings began with burnt toast. Her evenings ended with a half-clean sketchbook. And in between, she waited tables at Luna Cafe, a place held together by mismatched mugs and emotional damage. She told herself she liked the routine. Routine meant control. Control meant safety. And safety was what she promised her 8-year-old brother Noah after the fire 5 years ago took their parents and everything else that didn't fit into one duffel bag. Noah was smart. Too smart. He could rewire a radio, fix the Wi-Fi, and break every house rule before breakfast. He had his mother's smile and his father's curiosity, which in Aria's opinion was a dangerous genetic combination. That night, the rain was relentless, the kind that blurred the world into watercolor streaks. Aria was counting tips at the counter, humming off-key to an old song, when Noah peeked from behind the hallway door. "Can I watch the storm from the fire escape?" he asked. "No. Last time you almost turned into lightning bait," he grinned. "That was once. That was enough. Bed. Now." He sighed the sigh of an 8-year-old philosopher, muttered something about dictators, and disappeared toward his room. 15 minutes later, the apartment was quiet except for the rain and the soft buzz of the fridge that never stopped humming. Aria made herself instant noodles, dinner of champions, and stared at her sketchbook. The page was blank, of course. She'd been stuck for months. Every time she tried to draw, her hand froze halfway, like her mind was afraid of finishing something beautiful. Because the last time she did, her parents never got to see it. She was lost in that thought when a sound cut through the quiet. A car engine. Not unusual in Brooklyn, except this one didn't move. It idled. Low, steady, expensive. Her stomach tensed. That black sedan again. It had been parking across the street every few nights, engine humming like a patient animal. She peeked through the blinds. The streetlights reflected off tinted windows. Nothing moved inside. Creepy. But she decided paranoia was cheaper than therapy, so she ignored it. Then she glanced at the clock. 12:43 a.m. Noah's bedroom light was off. Good. She turned back toward the counter and froze. The front door latch was slightly open. Her heart dropped. Noah? No answer. Her throat went dry. She rushed to his room. The bed was empty. The window half open. Curtain flapping like a flag of bad decisions. Noah. She threw on her jacket and bolted down the stairwell, bare feet slapping against cold concrete. Outside, the rain hit her like needles. Across the street, the black car's headlights flashed once. Brief, deliberate. Aria ran. The car door opened. A tall man stepped out, rain glinting off his dark hair, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like trouble that owned property. In one hand, he held an umbrella. In the other, Noah's wrist. For one terrifying second, Aria thought her heart forgot how to beat. Noah looked perfectly fine, soaked, shivering, grinning like a cat that had found trouble and decided to keep it. The man beside him, however, did not look fine. He was tall, the kind of tall that made you straighten your posture, and his presence felt like an unsaid threat wrapped in politeness. Black shirt, dark eyes, clean lines, Even his silence had authority. Aria skidded to a stop in the rain. "Noah Keller, what did I tell you about?" He pointed at the man. "He's not a cop. You think?" The man's gaze flicked between them, assessing. "He's yours, I assume." His voice was smooth, low and measured, the kind of tone that made you feel like you were being quietly judged and found lacking. Aria straightened. "Yes, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let go of him." He did. Slowly, like he was deciding whether or not she deserved it. Noah ran to her, clutching her waist. "I'm sorry, Aria. I just wanted to see the car. It looked cool." Aria exhaled shakily, brushing his wet hair back. "You are never to do that again, do you hear me?" He nodded, then whispered, "He said you owe him." "What?" The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes, sharp and unreadable, met hers. "He hid in my car," he said evenly. "That could have gone badly. I returned him." "So yes," he tilted his head slightly. "You owe me," Aria blinked at him, then laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "I'm sorry, what? Do people actually say that in real life?" He didn't smile. Some do. Of course he didn't smile. He looked like the kind of man who filed a restraining order against Joy. "Look," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know who you are, but thank you for not, I don't know, calling the cops or selling him on eBay. But whatever this I owe you thing is, it's not happening." His eyes softened, barely. It already did. Something about the way he said it made her skin prickle. Like he wasn't talking about money or favors or anything ordinary. Aria took Noah's hand. "Okay, well, we're done here. Thank you, mysterious stranger, for not kidnapping my brother. Good night." She turned to leave, but his voice followed. Calm, unhurried. "Keep him away from that window. Some people don't return what they find." She stopped, looked back, but he was already closing the car door. The sedan pulled away from the curb, tires whispering against wet asphalt. Aria stood there in the rain, heart pounding, brain catching up. Who was that man? Back in the apartment, Noah changed into pajamas, mumbling apologies between yawns. Aria wrapped him in a towel, kissed his forehead, and tucked him into bed. She should have felt relief. But instead she felt watched, like a thread had been tied around her without permission. When she glanced outside, the street was empty again. Only puddles and the faint reflection of neon signs flickering across the glass. "Aria?" Noah's sleepy voice drifted through the dark. "Yeah, baby? Was he bad?" She hesitated. "I don't know." "Then why are you scared?" "Go to sleep, Noah." An hour later, she was still awake. The rain had stopped, but her thoughts hadn't. She sat by the window, sipping lukewarm coffee, staring at the place where that car had been. Something about him lingered, not just the threat, but the calm. The quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to get what he wanted. Her mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe he was rich. Maybe mob-adjacent. Maybe just really, really weird. But deep down, a small part of her, the reckless, curious part she usually ignored, wondered if fate ever knocked softly first. She laughed at herself. "No," she muttered. "Fate doesn't drive a luxury car." Still, when she closed the blinds and turned off the lights, she couldn't shake the feeling that the debt he mentioned wasn't over. The next morning, Brooklyn looked deceptively calm, like the city had agreed to pretend last night never happened. Aria, however, had the emotional stability of a wet matchstick. She overslept, spilled coffee on her shirt, and got caught in the world's longest subway delay. By the time she stumbled into Luna Cafe, she was 5 minutes late and already on her boss's hit list. "Rough night?" asked Tina, her coworker and unofficial therapist. "You could say that." "My brother almost joined the local mob." Tina blinked. "Wow, that's specific," Aria sighed. "Forget it. It's just been a week." She tried to laugh it off, but her mind kept circling back to that man, Leo Draven, as she would later learn. His face kept flashing in her memory. Unreadable eyes, quiet confidence, the kind of presence that made the air heavier. All day, she convinced herself it was over. That he'd forget about them. That "you owe me" was just a dramatic line from a stranger who liked scaring waitresses. She was wrong. By evening, as she wiped the counter and dreamed about instant noodles, 2 men in black suits entered the cafe. They didn't order coffee. They didn't speak to anyone else. They just set a small, elegant envelope on the counter. "For Ms. Aria Keller," one of them said. She frowned. That's me?" They nodded once, then left, as quietly as they came. Tina whispered, "Girl, you're either getting proposed to or subpoenaed." Aria tore the envelope open. Inside was a single card. Black background, silver lettering, no name, no phone number. Just 3 words. "PM, don't be late," her pulse stuttered. It couldn't be him, right? At 9:02 p.m., Aria was standing outside an iron gate overlooking the river, because apparently she was that kind of idiot. She told herself she wasn't scared. Just curious, extremely curious, and maybe slightly terrified. The gates opened on their own, like some invisible butler had been waiting. Beyond them was a long driveway, dimly lit, leading up to a modern mansion that looked like it came with its own moral dilemmas. When she reached the door, it opened before she could knock. A man in a dark suit motioned silently for her to enter. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, glass walls, art that probably cost more than her entire life. And in the center of it all stood him, Leo Draven, black suit, no tie. The faintest shadow of a smirk, like he'd expected her hesitation down to the second. "Ms. Keller," he said smoothly. "You're late." Aria forced a smile. "You know, I didn't have time to decode the secret villain invitation code." He tilted his head. "You came anyway. Curiosity. Poor life choices. Take your pick." For a moment, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Then it vanished. "You said I owe you," she said. "So what is this, a joke? Some kind of test?" He poured himself a drink, the movement controlled, deliberate. "A debt," he said simply. "And I don't like debts unpaid." "Look, my brother made a mistake." "He did," Leo interrupted, tone calm but unyielding. "And you're here because I don't punish children for curiosity." Her throat tightened. "Then what do you want?" Leo looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that saw right through people and found what they didn't want to show. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but it landed like a command. "I need someone who isn't afraid to see what others overlook." "You'll work for me?" Aria blinked. "Work for you? Doing what exactly? Kid testing your security system?" A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "Not quite. I already have a job. Not anymore." He set the glass down, eyes never leaving hers. "Consider this repayment. 1 favor, 1 debt. Then we're even." Something in his tone made her pulse skip, not out of fear, but something dangerously close to curiosity again. "You're serious," she said quietly. "Always." Aria crossed her arms. "And if I say no?" He shrugged slightly. "Then I'll assume you don't care what happens to that envelope of cash your landlord found under your door this morning." Her jaw dropped. "How do you—" He stepped closer, his voice low. "I know more than I should. That's what I do." For a heartbeat, they just stood there. 2 strangers bound by something neither of them understood yet. Finally, he handed her a sleek black folder. "Read this. Be here tomorrow at 8. Aria stared at it like it might bite. Then, because she didn't know what else to do, she took it. When she looked up again, Leo was already walking away, his voice echoing through the marble hall. "And Ms. Keller, don't be late twice." Outside, the rain had started again. Aria clutched the folder to her chest, heart racing, brain spinning. This was insane. Completely, absolutely insane. But somehow, deep down, she knew her life would never go back to fine-ish again. The next morning, Aria's quiet routine was shattered. 2 men in black tailored suits entered her cafe as if they were part of the morning light itself, unwelcome, inescapable. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the room, assessing every detail, every escape route. One of them handed her a single card, its edges crisp, the typeface sharp. "PM. Don't make me come back." The words burned on her retina long after the men had left, and even longer in her mind. A summons, a threat. She wasn't sure which was more terrifying. All day, the cafe felt alien. The chatter of customers sounded distant, muffled by a growing pulse of apprehension in her ears. By evening, as the sun dipped behind the Hudson skyline, she shut the cafe early. Her steps toward the riverfront were heavy, deliberate, as though each one carried the weight of the unknown. The mansion was unmistakable. Towering over the Hudson like a sentinel of old power, it was a structure built to intimidate. Marble columns reached toward the clouds, and the wrought iron gates seemed to mock any thought of casual entry. She paused before pressing the intercom button. Her hand trembled slightly, betraying her otherwise composed demeanor. The door opened before a response, revealing a hall drenched in shadows and soft golden light. Leo Draven stepped into view. He was 35, sharp-featured, his presence commanding without the need for words. His dark hair fell slightly into his eyes, but the gaze he fixed on her cut through any pretense of bravado. "Aria," he said, voice low, each syllable deliberate. It was a voice that demanded attention, demanded compliance, yet bore the cold precision of a scalpel. "Come inside," she followed, though the walls seemed to close around her with every step. The interior was immaculately designed, but not for comfort. It was the kind of perfection that reminded a visitor that they were observed at every angle, measured in every movement. Leo stopped in front of a grand staircase and turned to her. "The boy saw something no one was meant to see," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't kill children, but someone must pay, and that someone is you." Her pulse quickened, but she forced her expression into calm neutrality. "Me?" she asked, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. "Yes," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk brushing his lips. "You will serve me. Not as a pawn, not as a subordinate, as my personal assistant." The phrase sounded deceptively mundane, almost banal, but Aria felt the sting of it as though it were a whip. She knew, from the rumors and whispers in the city, from the traces she had caught before of his influence, that this was no ordinary employment. Argent Logistics, the company he introduced her to with a perfunctory flourish, was nothing more than a facade. Underneath its glossy exterior, it was a labyrinth of laundering, smuggling, and financial operations that moved in the shadows of legality. You will handle the books. You will schedule meetings. You will interact with partners. Discreetly, he said. Every word you speak outside these walls can and will be used. Obedience is mandatory. Resistance is not an option. She swallowed, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, but the memory of the card lingered. "Don't make me come back." For the first few days, Aria's life became a delicate dance between fear and necessity. The mansion was a maze of corridors, offices, and hidden rooms. Security cameras tracked every hallway, every staircase. She quickly learned the unspoken rules. Never linger, never question, never draw attention. Each misstep was a test, each glance observed. Leo rarely spoke unless required. When he did, it was as though his words carried weight far beyond their content. An offhand remark could reshape a plan she had spent hours perfecting. Yet paradoxically, he allowed her moments of autonomy, glimpses of freedom, only to remind her later that nothing in his domain was ever truly hers. The work was grueling. She learned to manage financial statements that twisted legality into ambiguity, to interact with board members whose smiles never reached their eyes, to navigate meetings where alliances shifted like shadows. Argent Logistics was a stage, and everyone was acting, but the stakes were terrifyingly real. Despite the fear, Aria began to notice the subtler aspects of Leo Draven. Moments when his mask of control slipped, revealing flickers of thoughtfulness, or the way his eyes lingered on details that no one else noticed. He was meticulous, yes, but not without depth. A part of her dreaded these glimpses, feared that understanding him might make her weaker, more entangled. One evening, after a particularly tense board meeting, she found herself alone in the office with him, papers scattered across the mahogany desk, the city lights glinting against the glass walls. He observed her silently, leaning against the doorway, as though considering her not as a subordinate, but as a puzzle to be solved. "Do you understand why you're here?" he asked, voice softer now, almost conversational. Yes, she replied, carefully measured. I understand. Good, he said. Because the moment you stop understanding, the moment you think you can outmaneuver me, that's when you'll fail. The statement was a warning and an acknowledgement of her intellect. Aria realized then that surviving under Leo Draven wasn't merely about following orders. It was about anticipating his expectations, navigating the invisible currents he controlled, and mastering the subtle psychology of fear and loyalty he wielded so effortlessly. Weeks passed, each day stretching into a tense rhythm of observation, obedience, and careful maneuvering. She began to see the structure of Argent logistics, the flow of money, the hidden pathways, the silent operators who carried out tasks without ever being seen. And she understood that Leo was more than a boss. He was a strategist, a predator in human form, orchestrating every move with precision and foresight. And yet, within the suffocating confines of this power, a strange dynamic began to emerge. There were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, where he allowed her to act independently. Not out of trust, she realized, but as a test, a game. The line between leverage and respect blurred, leaving her disoriented, cautious, and intrigued all at once. One night, as the mansion sat silent except for the distant hum of the city and the gentle lapping of the Hudson, Leo summoned her to the top floor. The room overlooked the river, panoramic windows revealing the glimmering city lights. He gestured toward the view. "Look at it," he said. "All of this, the money, the influence, the power, it can be yours. If you survive, if you play correctly." Her eyes met his. "And if I fail?" He smiled then, faint and cold. "Then the debt consumes you. And remember, it's never just the money. It's the choices, the obedience. The leash you've become," Aria understood. She was tethered, yet she walked willingly. Not because she trusted him, but because she needed to survive. And because she sensed, deep down, that in mastering the game Leo set before her, she might find a way to reclaim herself. As the weeks turned into months, Aria adapted. She became indispensable, not by becoming compliant, but by mastering the shadows, learning to read the currents of power, and maneuvering with precision beneath Leo's watchful gaze. The mansion, once a cage, became a battlefield she navigated with skill. And Leo? He remained an enigma, silent, calculating, yet occasionally revealing the flicker of a man who understood the value of intelligence, of cunning, of survival. The card's warning echoed in her mind. "Don't make me come back." But Aria realized something profound. In the world Leo Draven had pulled her into, it was never about him coming back. It was about her choice, whether to be prey or to learn to hunt in the shadows he commanded. And she chose. The mansion at Hudson was more than a building. It was a labyrinth of surveillance, secrecy, and quiet menace. Each corridor, each office, each hidden camera bore the unmistakable mark of its master. Aria walked its halls with careful precision, learning to anticipate the invisible eyes that followed her every move. Every morning began with strategy, every evening ended with reflection, and every night, fear curled around her like smoke. Leo Draven rarely spoke unnecessarily. When he did, his words were arrows, precise, direct, and impossible to ignore. "Mistakes are costly," he said once as she fumbled with a financial ledger. "Not for me, for you." His gaze lingered just long enough to make her understand the double meaning. Not only were errors a reflection of incompetence, they were a debt she would be forced to repay. Aria quickly learned the scope of her new world. Argent Logistics wasn't a company. It was a carefully constructed illusion. Legitimate contracts, invoices, and shipping manifests were only the surface. Beneath lay a network of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and discrete transfers, all flowing under Leo's command. Every operation was cloaked in legality, yet infused with risk. Her first major task was to organize a meeting with one of Argent's partners, a businessman whose charm concealed a temper as explosive as it was secretive. Aria prepared meticulously, reviewing every spreadsheet, every previous correspondence, every minor detail that could betray them. When she delivered the briefing, Leo observed silently from the corner of the room. His presence was oppressive but instructive. One wrong tone, one hesitation, and the meeting could collapse. "You anticipate," he said afterward, voice almost approving. Never react. Always anticipate. The subtle shift from fear to cautious competence became Aria's survival mechanism. Each day she grew more adept at navigating the treacherous waters of Argent logistics, but each night brought new tensions. She began to notice patterns in Leo's behavior. The slight softening of his voice when discussing certain financial strategies, the way he observed her interactions with employees, and the faint glimmers of curiosity behind his cold eyes. But there was no room for trust. Trust, she realized, was a luxury she could not afford. Every compliment, every approving glance, every moment of apparent leniency was a calculated measure, a test of her loyalty, her intelligence, her survival instinct. The mansion itself became a crucible. She learned to move unseen, to understand the rhythms of the security system, to decipher the subtle signals of employees who were more than willing to monitor her. Nights were the most perilous. Leo allowed her some freedom, yet even in solitude, she felt the weight of his surveillance. Cameras hidden in chandeliers, microphones disguised as decor, and the omnipresent knowledge that he could observe her at any moment, an invisible tether she could never cut. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, she found herself alone in the boardroom, reviewing financial anomalies in one of the shell accounts. The moonlight streamed through the panoramic windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble. She did not hear Leo enter. "You notice everything," he said softly from the doorway, voice almost casual, yet cutting through the silence like steel. She jumped, closing the ledger instinctively. I'm thorough," she managed, careful to keep her tone neutral. Leo stepped closer, walking slowly, deliberately, until he stood behind her chair. "Thorough," he mused, "is not enough. You must see beyond the numbers, beyond the logic. You must understand the currents beneath the surface, or you will drown." Aria swallowed, feeling the tension in her chest tighten. She realized, not for the first time, that surviving in this world was about understanding him. Not him as a man, but him as a force. His expectations were a landscape she had to navigate, a puzzle whose pieces constantly shifted. The weeks became months. Aria learned to handle complex transfers, to negotiate with international contacts, to manipulate data in ways that would appear legitimate to auditors, yet serve Leo's deeper objectives. Each task sharpened her mind, honed her instincts, and tested her endurance. Mistakes were met with terse reprimands, or long, silent stares that weighed heavier than any spoken threat. Through it all, Leo remained an enigma. His cold demeanor was a shield, yet there were moments, fleeting, dangerous moments, where his attention lingered, where he revealed a spark of unpredictability, almost human. Aria began to understand that Leo's control was absolute, not because he demanded it, but because he created conditions where compliance became instinctual and deviation perilous. One night, she discovered a hidden office within the mansion, a small room concealed behind a false wall, accessible only via a fingerprint scanner and retinal recognition. Inside, monitors displayed Argent's network in real time, flows of money, communications, encrypted files. It was the heart of the operation, a nerve center that few ever saw. And yet, she sensed that Leo knew she would find it. He entered silently, leaning against the doorway. "Curiosity is dangerous," he said softly, almost as a warning, "but useful. Never forget which side of the line you're on." Aria met his gaze. "I understand," she said, though inside her mind raced. She realized that in this world, survival required more than obedience. It demanded foresight, cunning, and an almost surgical understanding of human behavior. Her relationship with Leo evolved in subtle, unspoken ways. There were moments of tension, charged with unvoiced questions, moments where the line between fear and fascination blurred. She caught glimpses of a man who valued intelligence, precision, and resilience, qualities he had not often encountered, and perhaps admired quietly. But admiration was a dangerous thing in Leo's world. It could just as easily turn into scrutiny, testing, or exploitation. Then came the night of the first major operation. A financial transfer worth millions needed to be executed, masked under layers of legal cover. The task was straightforward for Leo, but for Aria it was a trial by fire. Any error would expose them, potentially unraveling months of preparation. She worked through the night, Leo standing nearby, silent, observing. Hours passed. Sweat coated her palms. The numbers blurred. Her mind raced, each decision a delicate balance between precision and speed. When the transfer finally completed without a hitch, Leo did not speak immediately. He merely studied her, expression unreadable, until she felt his approval settle over her like a shadow. "Well done," he said finally, voice low, almost approving. "But this is only the beginning. Every success brings a new challenge. Every victory will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine." Aria realized that her life had transformed completely. She was no longer merely a cafe owner, a civilian unmoored from danger. She had become a participant in a game of power, a chess piece and a strategist all at once, bound to Leo Draven not by choice, but by necessity. And yet within this forced servitude, she discovered an unexpected truth. Mastery over the shadows granted a kind of freedom. By understanding the machinery of Argent logistics, by learning to navigate Leo's expectations and the invisible threats around her, she was building skills, intelligence, and resilience that no ordinary life could have offered. But she never let herself forget the card, the summons that had brought her here. "Don't make me come back." The message was a reminder that Leo's power was absolute, that deviation carried consequences, and that survival was not just about intellect, it was about adaptability, courage, and instinct. As the months continued, Aria became indispensable, not because she submitted blindly, but because she understood the rules of Leo's world, the rhythm of his expectations, and the currents of influence that flowed through Argent logistics. And Leo? He remained an enigma, a predator whose control was total, yet whose occasional moments of subtle acknowledgement hinted at a complexity that both fascinated and terrified her. In the end, Aria realized something crucial. In Leo Draven's world, survival was not about defiance or escape. It was about mastery, of oneself, of others, and of the shadowy currents that governed power, fear, and loyalty. The leash had been placed around her neck, but in learning to navigate it, she discovered the means to move with strength, cunning, and purpose within the confines of the cage he had constructed. And she chose to walk that path, every step deliberate, every choice a negotiation with the invisible force that dictated her world. She would survive. She would adapt. And in time, she might even learn to control the currents herself. Aria woke the next morning with a hollow weight pressing against her chest. The mansion no longer felt like a building. It had become a living organism, breathing, watching, judging. Each corridor was a vein, each office a chamber pumping influence and fear into the veins of the city outside. She had been pulled entirely into Leo Draven's world, a world she barely understood but could no longer escape. Her first weeks were a baptism by fire. Argent Logistics demanded total immersion. It was no ordinary criminal organization. It was a meticulously designed system for obscuring wealth, consolidating influence, and, when necessary, eliminating threats. Money moved like blood through hidden channels, from corporations to offshore accounts, through layers of shell companies and intermediaries that masked every origin. Political influence, legal immunity, and lethal enforcement were the natural extensions of this network. Aria quickly understood that mistakes were fatal, not merely figuratively, but in practice. A single error in transferring funds, a misstep in communication with a client, or a wrong impression left with a corporate intermediary could trigger a cascade of repercussions. Yet the fear was balanced by fascination. Every spreadsheet was a map of power, every ledger entry, a thread connecting unseen forces. She was learning the architecture of a world where law was malleable, morality negotiable, and survival required both intellect and instinct. Leo's presence was omnipresent, yet subtle. He did not need to shout or display anger. One cold glance, one measured word, and the room would fall silent, the most defiant or careless employee shrinking instantly. He was a conductor orchestrating chaos with the precision of a master. Aria saw the effect he had on everyone around him, the way tension tightened shoulders, quickened heartbeats, and silenced idle chatter. Obedience came not from fear of punishment, but from the understanding that disobedience had consequences invisible yet immediate. For Aria, fear was an anchor, but fascination was a storm. She watched him, noticing the minute controls he exercised over himself and the people around him. Every gesture, every decision, every glance was deliberate. He never displayed impatience, but impatience lurked beneath his calm exterior, like a coiled spring. She found herself both terrified and hypnotized, drawn to the unspoken power he wielded, the solitude he maintained, and the perfect containment of his emotions. Late one night, she lingered in the top-floor office, pretending to review financial records while listening to the faint hum of the mansion's life. From the shadows, she heard him speak, his voice low, careful, but commanding. "No one touches the boy," he said. "He's done nothing wrong. Protect him." The words struck her like lightning. Aria froze, the pen in her hand hovering midair. For a man who orchestrated death and deceit with surgical precision, who commanded fear as naturally as breathing, he had drawn a line. He had a boundary, a trace of morality. She could not reconcile this with the image of the predator she had so meticulously constructed in her mind. In the days that followed, her perception of Leo deepened into a labyrinth of contradictions. He was a master manipulator, yes, but not without principles, strange, rigid, and terrifying principles that governed his actions. She saw the same intensity in his negotiations with political clients and corporate directors. While others cowered or schemed, Leo operated with the efficiency of a chess grandmaster, moving multiple pieces ahead, anticipating every move. Yet even in his calculated maneuvers, she saw glimpses of something human. Fleeting concern for those he considered innocent, subtle recognition of loyalty, and the rare, almost imperceptible nod of approval when she anticipated his expectations. Her own work became more complex and perilous. Leo entrusted her with sensitive operations, requiring her to balance legal facades against hidden transfers, to interact with high-level executives whose smiles concealed ambition and threat. Aria learned quickly. In this world, information was currency, loyalty was conditional, and discretion was life itself. Any error could unravel a chain of events, exposing urgent logistics to scrutiny, or worse, drawing lethal attention. She noticed the micro-tactics Leo used to observe her. One day, he asked her to draft a financial report for a supposed logistics audit. She worked through the night, unaware that he was monitoring not the figures but her approach, her methodology, her decisiveness, her capacity to think under pressure. The next morning, he simply said, "Efficient, but anticipate disruptions you haven't yet imagined." No further explanation, no praise. Yet the message was clear. Survival depended not on obedience alone, but on foresight, adaptability, and the capacity to read both people and situations with precision. Aria began to feel the mansion itself shaping her perception. The layout, the ambient surveillance, even the placement of furniture seemed designed to condition behavior. Hallways forced slow, deliberate movement. Staircases offered multiple vantage points, subtly reminding her she could be observed from any angle. The security system was an invisible tutor, training her to navigate an environment where attention to detail determined survival. Yet amid the relentless discipline, she sensed cracks in Leo's facade. He allowed her moments of autonomy, but they were calculated. A minor decision permitted, a meeting delegated. Each was a test, an exploration of her judgment, a gauge of her intuition. Aria realized that her growing skill was both a tool and a tether. The more competent she became, the more indispensable she was, and the deeper she descended into the world he controlled. Interactions with subordinates offered further insight into the hierarchy and psychology of the mansion. Employees and junior managers operated with nervous efficiency, responding instantly to his subtle cues. One slight raise of an eyebrow, one shift in stance, and a meeting would descend into silence or sudden compliance. Aria observed carefully, noting not just obedience but strategy, how individuals sought to interpret his motives, anticipate his expectations, and avoid crossing invisible lines. She began to understand that Leo's control was not through overt coercion, but through the creation of an environment where survival and competence were inseparable. One evening, she encountered a scenario that crystallized her understanding. An employee had misfiled documents critical to an ongoing operation, a mistake that could have exposed Argent to an audit. Leo entered the room, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. No words were exchanged initially. The employee shifted uncomfortably, realizing the weight of his gaze. Then, in a single sentence, delivered with deliberate precision, "Correct it, or tomorrow you won't be here." The simplicity of the statement was terrifying. No raised voice, no gesticulation, just an articulation of consequence. Obedience followed instantly. Aria understood. In Leo's world, terror was not shouted. It was inherent. The stakes were omnipresent, and comprehension of those stakes dictated behavior more effectively than any threat could. Aria herself became a participant in this silent education. Each challenge was a lesson in anticipation, manipulation, and judgment. She learned to predict the flow of decisions within Argent, to weigh the moral compromises of her actions, and to assess the consequences of every interaction. The mansion, the company, and Leo's presence combined to form a crucible in which fear, curiosity, and intellect were fused into survival. Her internal conflict grew. While fear dominated her waking thoughts, fascination intruded, subtle and persistent. Leo's control, his mastery of the environment and the people within it, was terrifying, but there was something magnetic, a recognition of his own loneliness, and the perfection of self-control that drew her attention despite herself. She saw a man who demanded absolute precision and discipline, yet allowed for loyalty and intellect to be recognized. The complexity unsettled her. He was a predator, a strategist, and yet in his rare moments of openness, almost human. This duality became more pronounced the night she overheard his directive regarding the boy. She was returning from a late meeting when she paused near the doorway to the conference room. Inside, Leo spoke softly to his subordinates. "No one is to touch the boy. He has done nothing wrong. Protect him at all costs." The words resonated with a dissonance she had not anticipated. A man capable of orchestrating immense networks of power and death possessed a line he would not cross. In that instant, Aria recognized a fragile morality, a code that operated within an otherwise ruthless framework. She felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. Relief, because even in this dangerous world, innocence could survive. Unease, because such exceptions revealed a complexity she had yet to fully understand or trust. From that night onward, her perception of Leo shifted subtly but irrevocably. He was not a simple predator. He was an architect, a strategist, a man whose morality was rigid, selective, and terrifyingly absolute. She found herself constantly analyzing him, searching for patterns, anticipating responses, and probing the boundaries of his control. And in doing so, she began to navigate her own place within the shadows, recognizing that her survival and influence depended not only on obedience, but on insight. As Aria immersed herself in this new reality, she realized that the mansion and Argent logistics were more than settings. They were instruments of transformation. Her skills sharpened, her instincts honed, and her understanding of power deepened. She was learning not just to survive, but to navigate the currents of a world where law, morality, and life itself were negotiable commodities. By the time months passed, Aria had become an indispensable part of the operation, yet even as she gained competence, she never allowed herself to forget the initial warning, the summons that had forced her into this shadowy world. Fear remained a constant companion, but now it was tempered by understanding, by strategy, and by the realization that mastery of the shadows was the only path to survival, and perhaps eventually to agency. And Leo? He remained an enigma, fearsome, commanding, and yet occasionally human. In his rare moments of disclosure, he revealed a complexity that both intimidated and fascinated her, reminding her that in a world ruled by shadows, even the most impenetrable predator could be defined by unseen lines of principle. Aria understood, finally, that her journey through Leo Draven's world was far from over. She was no longer merely a pawn, nor simply a survivor. She was becoming a participant, a strategist, and perhaps a challenger in a system of control, morality, and power whose depth she was only beginning to fathom. The mansion had grown familiar, yet that night, it felt suffocating. The hum of the security systems, the distant waves of the Hudson, even the faint rustle of papers in the offices, it all pressed against Aria's chest. She had begun to navigate the shadows of Argent logistics with confidence, but a gnawing curiosity tugged at her mind. Something about Leo Draven's unwavering control, the intensity behind his cold gaze, had always hinted at a story buried beneath the surface, a wound hidden behind the mask of authority. She found herself lingering in the private study for the first time without permission. It was an opulent room, lined with dark mahogany shelves, each containing volumes of financial records, ledgers, and documents detailing the intricate web of the organization. Yet amid the familiar stacks of business files, something different caught her eye. A reinforced steel safe, its surface scuffed and aged. Curiosity, that dangerous and irresistible force, guided her fingers over the combination. The lock clicked open with a metallic sigh, revealing the contents within. Among various folders, there was a neatly bound file marked with a name she had never seen before. Clara Draven. Aria pulled the file out cautiously, flipping through photographs, letters, and police reports. A girl, no older than 12, smiled from the photographs. Bright eyes, dark hair, a face that carried the innocence of childhood untouched by the world's cruelty. The files detailed her disappearance in 2012, a case that had gone cold years ago. There were hints of a kidnapping, suspicious connections to organized crime, and possible involvement of trafficking networks operating across borders. The room seemed to shrink around her. Aria felt the weight of history, of grief, pressing down. She knew she should leave the file and pretend ignorance. But the urge to understand Leo, his control, his ruthlessness, his peculiar humanity, overpowered her fear. She needed to know. The next morning she approached him cautiously, the file clutched in her hands. Leo was reviewing operations in the boardroom, his posture rigid, every gesture precise. She waited until a lull in his focus, then spoke. "Leo, who is Clara Draven?" Her voice was steady, but a tremor betrayed her anxiety. For a moment, nothing. Then the room changed. Leo's calm exterior cracked. His head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing with an intensity that made her stomach drop. In a sudden motion, he grabbed a glass from the table and smashed it against the wall. The sound was explosive, shattering, scattering shards across the floor. The boardroom went silent, employees frozen in shock. Leo's voice, low and raw, cut through the silence. "How dare you?" Aria's heart raced, but she did not flinch. "I needed to understand," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "I need to know why. Why you run this. Why Argent is like this." For a long moment, Leo's hands trembled slightly as he leaned against the table, breathing heavy, but controlled. Then, slowly, almost as if forcing himself through pain, he spoke. "Clara was my sister." The words were brittle, fragile, almost impossible to comprehend. He gestured to the file, his eyes dark pools of grief and fury. "She was taken from me in 2012, a girl with her whole life ahead of her. Stolen, murdered, and the people responsible, connected to the very network I now operate within, have never faced justice." Aria felt the air in the room grow thick, charged with a mix of rage, sorrow, and unspoken consequences. She swallowed, careful not to interrupt, careful not to speak over the raw human vulnerability that had cracked through Leo's usual armor. I joined them to destroy them from the inside," he continued, voice quiet but forceful, each word measured. "I thought I could infiltrate, dismantle, and punish, but the system, the network, it consumes everything. Power, money, fear, it changes you. It twists you until the line between justice and cruelty blurs." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare display of exhaustion, of humanity worn thin by years of calculated violence. "I didn't start as what you see now. I didn't want to be this, but you adapt or you perish. And the deeper you go, the harder it is to recognize yourself, until you realize that in trying to save what's left of innocence, you've become something you once hated." Aria stood silently, the enormity of his revelation pressing down like a storm. She had seen his ruthlessness, his perfection of control, his ability to silence rooms with a single glance. But this was the marrow of him, the broken origin of the man behind the predator. I didn't know, she whispered. A thought half formed, caught in her throat. Leo shook his head almost bitterly. No one does. And that's the point. You see only what I allow you to see. But that does not make it any less real. Every action, every order, every calculated risk is a reflection of that loss. Clara. She is why I can't forgive. Why I can't rest. Why I can't stop. And yet, I am bound by the system I swore to destroy. Aria felt an unexpected swell of empathy, a flicker of connection that she had not anticipated. The man who had seemed invulnerable, unapproachable, almost mythic in his control and ruthlessness, was defined by grief, by loss, and by the inexorable pull of a network he had once sought to destroy. Her mind raced with questions, but she sensed he would not answer lightly. So she listened, letting the silence between them carry meaning. And Leo, after what felt like an eternity, continued softer this time, almost to himself. She deserved justice. She deserved life. And yet all I have is this. He gestured at the mansion, the files, the empire of shadows he controlled, a life built on fear, control, and the very corruption I despised. Aria's perception shifted. She realized then that his control, his ruthlessness, his perfection of strategy and discipline were not born of innate cruelty. They were forged in grief, necessity, and the relentless drive to impose order on a world that had taken everything from him. He had been broken by loss, and in attempting to reclaim power, he had become the architect of the very darkness he had once sought to eradicate. In the days that followed, her approach to Leo changed subtly. She observed him with a deeper understanding, noticing not just the predator, but the man shaped by tragedy. The small gestures, the moments of introspection, the rare glimpses of restraint, they were now legible, pieces of a puzzle that made sense only in the context of Clara's story. Work at Argent Logistics continued, but Aria's interactions were infused with a new layer of comprehension. She navigated his expectations with greater precision, anticipating not just the operational needs, but the emotional undercurrents that shaped his decisions. She became not just a participant in the shadows, but a student of the man who commanded them, recognizing that power and grief were inextricably entwined in his methods. And then came moments that revealed the duality of his nature. One evening, while reviewing client files, Aria noticed a hesitation in his directives, a pause that suggested not indecision, but the weight of memory. Another time, he allowed a junior employee to express concern over a morally ambiguous task, listening silently, before delivering a solution that balanced pragmatism with rare moral consideration. Each instance reminded her that beneath the calculated ruthlessness, there was a man negotiating with his own conscience, haunted by the past, yet bound by necessity. Aria's empathy grew, tempered by caution. She understood the danger of misreading him, of assuming that grief excused cruelty or leniency. But she also saw the possibility of connection, of understanding the human beneath the predator. The revelation of Clara's fate illuminated the shadows in which she now operated, casting both light and doubt across her perceptions. The mansion, the files, the silent corridors, they all carried new significance. Each room was not merely a locus of control and fear, but a space infused with the weight of memory, of unresolved loss. Leo's actions, once inscrutable, now carried context. His decisions were not arbitrary. They were measures of a man trying to reconcile the system he manipulated with the pain he carried. Aria realized that survival in Leo's world required more than skill or obedience. It required comprehension of the forces, both personal and systemic, that shaped the man at its center. She had entered as an assistant, a subordinate, but she began to perceive the nuances, the moral labyrinth, and the human fractures within the steel of his control. And in understanding, she began to feel a measure of connection. Not trust, not friendship, but recognition of shared humanity in a landscape defined by shadows. Leo Draven, she realized, was not a monster by birth. He was a man forged by loss, molded by vengeance, and trapped by a network of power that both empowered and corrupted him. And it was this revelation, the glimpse of vulnerability beneath the predator, that allowed her to navigate the world he controlled with insight, caution, and a growing comprehension of the man she could never fully possess, yet could begin to understand. In the quiet aftermath of the revelation, Aria returned to her work with a renewed sense of purpose. She understood the stakes, the weight of grief and power, and the razor-thin line between obedience and autonomy. She knew the Empire of Shadows was not merely a system to serve, but a reflection of a man grappling with his own humanity, and that understanding him was as vital as understanding the intricate operations she now managed. And so, amid the corridors of the mansion, the endless ledgers of Argent logistics, and the meticulous orchestration of fear and control, a new dynamic emerged. Aria was no longer simply a pawn, no longer merely an observer. She was a participant in a complex interplay of grief, power, and survival, learning to navigate the shadows while slowly deciphering the man who cast them. The past had been revealed. The present demanded mastery, and the future remained uncertain. A landscape of possibilities shadowed by loss, power, and the relentless pursuit of justice and survival intertwined. The mansion was quiet that evening, save for the soft hum of the security systems and the distant lapping of the Hudson against the riverbank. Aria sat at the grand mahogany desk in Leo's private study, reviewing financial records late into the night. Her eyes traced streams of numbers, cross-referencing accounts, following patterns that had become second nature since her immersion into Argent logistics. The work, once daunting, now had a rhythm, a pulse she had learned to anticipate. But tonight, the numbers didn't line up as expected. One series of transactions drew her attention. Payments routed through layers of shell companies, ultimately connecting to a corporate entity she recognized immediately. Her breath caught. The logo, the subtle watermark on internal documents, it was unmistakable. This company, one of Argent's major partners, was the insurance corporation that had once owned her childhood home. The house where her parents had perished in a fire that had always been suspicious, that had never been fully explained. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the financial threads, following them through the labyrinthine network of offshore accounts, subsidiaries, and shell entities. Each entry, each transfer, told a story of calculated complicity, of influence concealed beneath legality. A shiver ran down her spine, not merely from fear, but from the weight of the realization. The people responsible for the loss of her family might still wield power, protected by wealth, connections, and secrecy. And now, unknowingly, Leo Draven was entangled with them. She could not remain silent. Closing her laptop, she stormed to the boardroom, clutching the files. The room was dimly lit, the Hudson casting muted reflections across the polished surfaces. Leo sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents with his usual precise calm. She placed the folder in front of him, her fingers gripping the edges tightly. "Leo," she said, her voice sharp, but measured with the restraint she had learned from him. "This company, one of your main partners, they owned the house where my parents died. The fire, the incident that killed them, are you protecting them?" For a moment, Leo did not move. The calm in his posture remained, but the tension in his shoulders was visible. He lifted his gaze to hers, expression unreadable, eyes dark and unyielding. "I don't know," he said quietly, finally. "But if it's true, if these people are responsible, I will end them." The words struck her like thunder. For the first time, she saw the hint of unpredictability in him, a deviation from the rigid code he maintained. He had never acted impulsively, never broken the unspoken rule. Do not harm allies, do not compromise the network. Yet now for her, that line was shifting. Aria felt a complex mixture of fear and cautious hope. Leo Draven, the man who commanded fear, precision, and loyalty, was suddenly vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed. He was willing to confront uncertainty, even at risk to his carefully maintained control. They spent the following hours meticulously cross-referencing accounts, tracing transfers, and mapping connections. Each revelation brought new questions, and each question required delicate negotiation with the shadows of the network Leo had built. For the first time, Aria felt not just like an assistant, but like a partner, someone whose insight could influence action at the highest level. "I need to know everything you've got," she said finally, pushing a stack of documents toward him. "Every transfer, Every contract. Every partnership that touches this corporation. If they were involved, if they covered up wrongdoing, we need evidence. Real proof. Leo studied her, the faintest flicker of consideration crossing his features. You understand what this means, he said. If we pursue this, we risk exposure. We risk destabilizing the network. You are aware of the danger? I'm aware, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. And I'm willing to take it. For my parents. For the truth. He nodded once, sharply, a signal of acknowledgement more than agreement. Then, without another word, he began providing her access, hidden files, encrypted communications, even private recordings that had never been shared with anyone else. He taught her methods of tracing financial footprints, of reading between the lines of legal documents, of uncovering the invisible threads that bound powerful people together. As the nights stretched into weeks, their collaboration deepened. Aria learned to anticipate his expectations, not merely as commands, but as patterns of thought. She recognized his subtle cues, how he shifted his posture when a transaction was sensitive, how his tone adjusted when discussing potential risks. And Leo, in turn, began to allow her small, autonomous decisions, trusting her judgment in ways he had never before extended to any subordinate. The mansion became both a laboratory and a battlefield. They moved with quiet efficiency, conducting investigations under the radar, testing hypotheses, and gathering intelligence without alerting the broader network. Each discovery was a victory, each misstep a potential disaster, but the sense of mutual reliance grew, an unspoken bond forged in danger, in the shared pursuit of justice and truth. One night, after a particularly tense session tracing offshore accounts linked to the insurance corporation, Aria stepped into the lounge for air. Leo followed silently, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey and handing one to her without a word. She accepted, their hands brushing briefly, a fleeting connection in a world otherwise governed by control and calculation. Do you ever, she began hesitantly, regret what you've become? He stared into his glass, the amber liquid catching the low light. I regret only that I could not prevent what happened to Clara, he said after a long pause. Everything else, I chose to survive, to gain control, to ensure that nothing else like it happens under my watch, even if that means becoming what I hate. Aria considered his words carefully. She realized that Leo Draven was not merely ruthless because of ambition or desire for power. He was meticulous because he could not afford to fail anyone else, and now she understood. He was willing to bend the rules, to break precedent. For her, not out of romance or sentiment, but out of acknowledgement of trust, loyalty, and shared purpose. Their collaboration became increasingly sophisticated. They devised covert methods to collect evidence from corporate partners, falsified communications, hidden audits, and discreet surveillance that revealed discrepancies in suspicious behavior. Every move was calculated to avoid alerting the network, yet sufficient to build a case that could expose the corrupt players implicated in both Aria's personal tragedy and the broader criminal web Leo had infiltrated. As the network of financial transactions came into focus, they began identifying individuals who had directly benefited from negligence or complicity in the fire that destroyed Aria's family home. Names appeared repeatedly, linked across accounts, subsidiaries, and international transfers. With each discovery, Aria felt a mixture of anger, fear, and grim satisfaction. She was unearthing the truth piece by piece, and Leo was guiding her with the precision of a man who understood both the power and danger of knowledge. For the first time, the line between employer and ally blurred. They were no longer merely subordinate and master. They were collaborators navigating a complex landscape of power, influence, and morality. Trust began to form, not absolute but functional, built on mutual necessity and shared objectives. Aria realized that the only way to survive and to achieve justice was to operate in tandem with Leo, leveraging his resources and expertise while providing insight and determination he could not have alone. And Leo, for his part, allowed himself the rare acknowledgement of dependence, not openly, not with overt words, but through gestures, access, and subtle guidance. He permitted her agency, encouraged initiative, and tolerated questioning where previously he would have silenced it. Their unspoken pact grew. He would protect her, provide resources and guidance, and she would navigate the operational, analytical, and investigative aspects of their plan. Yet danger remained omnipresent. Every transaction, every audit, every partner they investigated carried the potential for exposure. The network was vast, resilient, and ruthless, and while their alliance strengthened, it was tempered by the constant awareness that a single misstep could shatter both their efforts and their lives. Through this high-stakes collaboration, Aria began to perceive another facet of Leo Draven, one shaped not only by grief and loss, but by pragmatism and strategy. His meticulous planning, his anticipation of human behavior, and his unwavering focus on long-term objectives revealed a mind capable of both immense ruthlessness and subtle calculation. He was a man forged in tragedy, tempered by power, and now, for the first time, willing to extend trust selectively, based on competence, insight, and shared purpose. Weeks turned into months, and their investigation yielded results. Evidence accumulated, patterns emerged, and the network of corruption and complicity within the insurance corporation and its connections to Aria's past became increasingly tangible. Aria, who had entered Leo's world as a subordinate, was now an active participant, a partner in uncovering truths that could dismantle powerful interests. In quiet moments, after long nights of cross-referencing financial trails and analyzing documents, Aria realized something profound. The fear that had once dominated her existence within the mansion was no longer absolute. It was tempered by knowledge, by skill, and by the understanding that she was no longer alone in confronting the darkness that had shaped both her life and Leo's. Trust, fragile and conditional, had been forged in the crucible of shared purpose, and it was this trust that allowed them to act with coordination, precision, and resilience. And as she looked across the table at Leo one night, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, she understood that their bond was more than strategic. It was a connection born of necessity, refined by understanding, and strengthened by the recognition of shared vulnerability. Together they could navigate the shadows, confront the architects of her past tragedy, and challenge the network of power that had corrupted so many lives. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and laden with moral compromise, but Aria no longer faced it alone, and in that knowledge, she found a measure of strength and the beginnings of faith in a man who, despite his ruthlessness, had chosen to break precedent for her sake, and in doing so, had invited her into a world where connection, trust, and determination could become instruments of justice. The mansion was unusually quiet that afternoon. Leo had left early to meet a new partner, a negotiation meant to solidify Argent Logistics' influence in a volatile sector. Aria remained behind, going through financial audits, unaware that a storm was gathering within the shadows of the empire. Marcus Hale, Leo's trusted deputy, had been plotting for months. His loyalty was a facade, carefully maintained to mask ambition. While Leo focused on the network's far reaches, Marcus maneuvered in silence, gathering allies, information, and leverage. The subtle murmurs of discontent among the staff, the quiet manipulations of contracts and accounts, they were all pieces of a plan designed to usurp Leo's authority. And most dangerously, Marcus had discovered Aria's connection to Leo's personal motivations. By late afternoon, the trap was set. Two masked men entered the mansion through a rarely used service entrance, avoiding the main security grids. Aria, engrossed in her work, barely noticed their presence until the first one was behind her, a cold hand pressing against her shoulder. She tried to resist, but the second man quickly subdued her, binding her wrists and gagging her mouth. Panic surged through her chest as she realized the magnitude of the situation. The files she had been working on, evidence she had painstakingly gathered, were now at risk. But worse, her life was in the hands of unknown assailants, men who understood she was a weapon to manipulate Leo. Hours later, Leo returned, only to find the mansion eerily still. The absence of his team's usual movements, the lack of activity, immediately alerted him. He noticed the subtle signs of intrusion, displaced papers, tripped security sensors, and the faint scent of fear lingering in the air. His pace quickened, every movement precise. calculated yet fueled by a raw, personal urgency. When he reached the room where Aria had been held, the door was ajar. Inside, the scene confirmed his worst fears. She was bound, gagged, eyes wide with terror, and Marcus Hale's betrayal laid bare in the scattered security feed monitors. Leo's breath hitched, but there was no hesitation. His hand brushed against the concealed weapon beneath his coat as he scanned the room. The attackers, confident in their leverage, underestimated the predator they had cornered. The first shot rang out silently, Leo's marksmanship precise and merciless. One man fell before he could react. The second lunged at Aria, but Leo intercepted him with a single brutal strike, driving him into the wall. Blood spattered the polished floor, a stark contrast to the calm efficiency of the mansion's interior. Aria, though frightened, could only watch, her gag muffling her reactions. Her mind struggled to reconcile the man she had begun to trust with the violence unfolding before her. Leo, the strategist, the man of precision, was now a predator in full. And for the first time, she saw him kill. When the chaos settled, she managed to pull at her restraints, sobbing and shaking. You're no different from them, she spat through the gag, disbelief and horror in her eyes. Leo paused, breathing heavily. Blood streaked across his hands and shirt from the minor wounds he had sustained. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze, his voice low, almost a whisper, yet firm and commanding. "I know," he said, "but I will not let them touch you." "Not ever." His words, though simple, carried weight far beyond the physical realm. Aria could see it in his eyes, the protective instinct, the relentless determination, and the willingness to cross boundaries he had never before crossed. He had broken his own rules, violated his own code, to ensure her survival. Their escape, however, was far from simple. Marcus Hale had anticipated Leo's protective streak and had left contingencies in place. As they navigated the corridors of the mansion, now partially compromised by intruders loyal to Marcus, Leo moved with a combination of tactical precision and raw urgency. Each corner turned, each doorway crossed, carried the threat of ambush, yet he guided Aria silently, ensuring she remained as safe as possible despite the chaos. Gunfire erupted in the hallways as Marcus's collaborators attempted to intercept them. Leo returned fire with efficiency, every movement calculated, yet the strain was visible. A bullet grazed his shoulder, another clipped the side of his torso, and yet he pressed forward, his focus unwavering. Aria, guided by instinct and his whispered instructions, followed closely, navigating debris, shadows, and the unpredictable movement of the attackers. At one point, they reached a service elevator. Leo pressed the button for the lower garage, but the mechanism had been tampered with. He cursed under his breath, scanning the floor for alternatives. Aria noticed a narrow maintenance staircase leading down, a risky route, but the only viable option. He gestured to her, urgency in his eyes. "This way. Stay close. Do exactly as I say." The descent was tense, the confined space amplifying the sounds of distant gunfire, the clatter of Marcus's men searching the mansion. Aria's heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus, relying on the instincts Leo had subtly instilled in her over months of collaboration. Every movement, every decision had to be precise. One misstep could mean death. When they finally emerged into the garage, Leo's injuries slowed him, yet he continued to move with determination. Aria, for the first time, saw the man she had admired for his control and strategy as human, wounded, vulnerable, yet unyielding. The escape vehicle was already waiting. Arranged by Leo in anticipation of potential contingencies, he guided her inside, and she sank onto the seat, adrenaline and fear coursing through her. Leo sat beside her, adjusting the bandages hastily on his wounds, eyes scanning the perimeter as they prepared to move. Aria began, voice trembling. "I didn't know you. I didn't know you could kill like that." He looked at her, eyes shadowed, voice low but steady. "Sometimes survival demands it. Sometimes protection demands it. You think I like this? You think I'm proud? But if I had hesitated?" He shook his head, pain and determination intertwined. "You wouldn't be here." Aria swallowed, processing the juxtaposition of the man she had known, the strategist, the controlled, the almost untouchable, and the predator who had just saved her life. The revelation unsettled her, yet deepened the respect and reliance she had begun to feel. She realized that in this world, boundaries were fluid, morality was conditional, and trust was both fragile and invaluable. As the vehicle sped away from the mansion, the cityscape stretching before them, Aria leaned back, observing Leo with a newfound perspective. He was no longer an abstract figure of control and intimidation. He was a man shaped by loss, by power, by necessity, and now, by the act of breaking his own rules to protect her. Their alliance, tested by betrayal and blood, had been transformed. Marcus Hale's treachery had exposed vulnerabilities, but it had also forged a connection built on survival, trust, and shared purpose. Aria understood that navigating the shadows required not only intelligence and courage, but also the willingness to confront the uncomfortable truth, that the man she depended on could be both her protector and a killer. For the first time, she felt a complex combination of fear, respect, and cautious trust. Leo Draven had crossed a line, shattered his own rules, and yet had preserved her life. In the aftermath of the betrayal, the lesson was clear. Survival in this world required pragmatism, vigilance, and a willingness to accept uncomfortable truths about those you relied upon. But the threat was not over. Marcus Hale remained at large, empowered by his betrayal, with knowledge of both Leo's network and Aria's vulnerabilities. The next steps required planning, precision, and an unwavering focus on both strategy and execution. Aria, now a partner in the shadows, understood that their fight was far from over. And as they drove through the darkened streets, the Hudson glinting faintly in the moonlight, Aria realized something vital. She could trust Leo, partially, cautiously, and strategically, but she had to be prepared for the moment when trust alone would not be enough. Their bond had been forged in betrayal and blood, and its strength would be tested again. Yet in that moment, despite the fear and the chaos, she allowed herself a fleeting sense of clarity. Together, they were stronger than the sum of their fears, their enemies, and the shadows that sought to engulf them. Leo glanced at her once, silently acknowledging the unspoken agreement between them. No words were necessary. The mission, the survival, and the path ahead were clear. They would face Marcus, confront the treachery, and reclaim control, not only of Argent, but of the consequences Marcus had set in motion. Aria's fear remained, but it was tempered now by purpose and trust. And for the first time, she felt that she and Leo Draven could face the darkness together, navigating betrayal, violence, and the fragile line between control and chaos. The cabin in Maine sat secluded among tall pines, its wood exterior weathered by time and wind, perched on a ridge overlooking a frozen lake. Snow crunched underfoot as Aria led Noah, the boy whose presence had become a quiet anchor amidst the chaos, to the front door. Leo followed slowly, each step deliberate, his injuries apparent, his shirt damp with blood, his shoulder wrapped haphazardly in a makeshift bandage, and a faint pallor lining his jaw. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and dust, warm from a small wood stove that Aria quickly stoked. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Leo sank into a worn leather armchair, letting out a long breath that seemed to carry months of tension and fear. Aria fussed over him, pressing a damp cloth to his fevered forehead, tending to the shallow cuts and bruises from the shootout. She worked silently, her movements precise yet tender, her mind a swirl of worry, lingering resentment, and a strange, reluctant affection that had grown over the past weeks. "You're burning up," she said softly, her voice breaking the quiet. "You need to rest." Leo shook his head slightly, but his eyes softened. "Rest can wait," he murmured, voice hoarse. "We need to be prepared. Marcus." He trailed off, the name alone enough to darken the room. Aria sat on the edge of the sofa nearby, watching him with a mix of concern and frustration. "Leo, you're bleeding, feverish, exhausted. You've done enough already. Let me handle this part for now." For a long moment he studied her. There was a tension in his posture that spoke of control restrained. And yet, under it, a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to witness. He exhaled slowly, and finally, in a low, almost confessional tone, said, "I've spent so long hiding behind control, behind fear, thinking fear was the only way to survive, that it was the only thing that kept me alive." Aria's hand stilled, her gaze meeting his. "And now?" He let the question hang before answering, quieter, almost a whisper. "No, when I see you, when I see Noah, I remember the person I used to be. Not the predator, not the strategist, not the shadow, the man before everything broke." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Aria reached out, tentatively placing her hand over his. The contact was light, yet electric, bridging months of tension, fear, and unspoken understanding. She began, her voice faltering. "I don't feel sorry for you. She paused, struggling to find words adequate for what had grown in her over these weeks. "I understand, and that makes everything else bearable. Somehow." Leo looked at her, the mask of control faltering as he allowed himself the rare vulnerability. The warmth in his eyes, the subtle tremor in his jaw, betrayed emotions he had long suppressed. Relief, recognition, and perhaps the faint stirrings of hope. Before either of them could say more, Aria leaned in. The kiss was quiet, tender, not born of pity or fleeting desire, but of understanding, of shared history, and a fragile trust that had been forged in shadows and danger. Leo's hand hovered for a moment before finding hers, their fingers intertwining. It was a brief escape from the harsh reality waiting beyond the cabin's walls, a fleeting acknowledgement that even in a world built on fear and betrayal, connection could survive. The night stretched, and eventually exhaustion claimed them both. Leo slept in the armchair, Aria on a small cot nearby, and Noah curled in a blanket by the stove. The cabin, isolated and cold, became a sanctuary, if only temporarily. Morning light filtered through frost-lined windows. The serenity was deceptive. Leo awoke first, grimacing as he touched his side where a new pain had emerged. His phone lay on the table, one of the few devices that still worked after careful precautions. Notifications blinked, encrypted messages, subtle alerts, and one that made his jaw tighten. Marcus was closing in. They had been traced. Aria, waking to the faint rustle of his movements, noticed the sudden change in his expression. The warmth of the previous night evaporated, replaced by steel determination and an unflinching readiness. "They've found us," he said quietly, almost to himself. Aria's heart sank. "Leo, we can stay. We're hidden here. Let them come. They won't find us easily." He shook his head, voice low but firm. "No, not here. If I stay, they'll come for this place. For Noah. For you. And next time, I won't have anything left to protect." Aria's hands flew to his arm. "Don't go, please. You've done enough. You're hurt. We can plan, wait. Make them expose themselves." He looked at her, the faintest trace of softness passing through his eyes before it was replaced with resolve. "This is not about waiting. This is about ending it. Marcus, the network, the betrayal. It stops here. I will not let them threaten what I care about again." The weight of his words pressed on Aria. She understood now. Leo was not merely driven by revenge or pride. He was driven by a desire to ensure survival, not just his own, but hers and Noah's. Every choice he made, every risk he took, was calculated to confront danger directly, to preempt further harm. Tears pricked at her eyes. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "You won't," he said, his voice firm but carrying an edge of vulnerability. "Not if I can prevent it. But I can't stay here, not while they're coming. You and Noah, you deserve safety. That is my responsibility." Aria's chest tightened. She wanted to protest, to argue, to convince him to stay, but deep down, she knew it was futile. Leo's sense of duty, his control, and his understanding of the stakes outweighed any plea. He had made this choice long before she arrived at the cabin, and now, she had to trust him, as she had learned to trust his decisions in the shadows of Argent Logistics. Finally, she nodded, though her hands trembled as she released his arm. "Then go. Finish this, but come back." His gaze softened fleetingly before he turned toward the preparation for departure. "I will, I promise." This ends one way or another, for all of us. He gathered what supplies he could, treated his wounds as best he could with Aria's assistance, and prepared for the journey back to the city. The snow fell gently outside, the silence of the woods providing a deceptive calm before the storm he was about to re-enter. Aria watched him go, the boy Noah clinging to her side. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange, steadfast hope. She had seen the man behind the predator, the strategist behind the ruthlessness, the grief behind the control. And now she understood the depth of his commitment, the complexity of his choices, and the lengths he would go to protect those he cared about. The cabin fell silent again, the fire crackling softly, marking the pause before the inevitable confrontation. Outside, the world awaited, a world of betrayal, danger, and reckoning. Inside, Aria steeled herself. She could not fight alongside him yet, but she could prepare, gather strength, and hope that the bond forged in trust, fear, and understanding would endure. For Leo Draven, the path was clear. He would return to the city, face Marcus Hale, confront the consequences of betrayal, and attempt to dismantle the web of corruption once and for all. And for Aria, the lesson was equally clear. Survival depended not only on skill and strategy, but on the courage to trust, and the understanding that sometimes love and loyalty were forged in the crucible of danger, blood, and unwavering resolve. The sun rose over the frozen lake, casting long shadows across the cabin's wooden floor. Aria held Noah close, listening to the wind in the trees, feeling the weight of waiting. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Leo Draven was moving through the darkness, a man wounded, determined, and ready to confront the truths that had long haunted them both. This was not the end. It was the prelude to the reckoning, the moment where past, betrayal, and trust would collide in a storm that could either destroy or redeem them all. New York City sprawled beneath a gray, overcast sky, indifferent to the quiet storm brewing within its concrete veins. Leo moved through the streets with the silent precision of a predator, every step deliberate, every breath measured. His body ached from the injuries sustained in Maine, his fever long cooled but replaced by exhaustion that weighed on him like chains. Yet he moved with a singular purpose. Marcus Hale had to be stopped, an Argent logistics network dismantled. He entered the city like a shadow, invisible yet omnipresent. His path was calculated, informed by intelligence Aria had painstakingly collected. Every shell company, every offshore account, every accomplice Marcus had relied on was mapped in his mind. The evidence was a weapon now. Aria's meticulous work became the blueprint for the collapse he intended to orchestrate. The warehouse Marcus had chosen as his stronghold was on the outskirts of the city, a massive nondescript structure that loomed like a sentinel over abandoned docks. Leo approached under the cover of night, the cold wind slicing through his jacket, carrying the scent of salt water from the nearby Hudson. He paused briefly, recalling Aria's words from the cabin. "Be careful. Don't let him see you coming." He allowed himself a single nod of acknowledgement. This was no longer a game of stealth, but of precision, strategy, and survival. Inside the warehouse, Marcus waited, flanked by heavily armed men who had grown complacent in their confidence. The room was dimly lit, crates stacked haphazardly, shadows stretching across the concrete floor. Marcus's smile was sharp, smug, a predator confident in his perceived superiority. "Well, well," Marcus drawled, voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Leo Draven, I was wondering when you'd crawl back out of the woodwork. Did you really think you could dismantle everything I've built alone?" Leo's eyes swept the room, calculating distances, trajectories, and escape routes. "I didn't come here to talk," he said quietly, the calm in his tone contrasting the tension in the air. "I came to end it," Marcus laughed, a low, dangerous sound. "End it? You're already outnumbered. And even if you weren't, this city doesn't belong to you. It belongs to power, money, and control. 3 things you've always feared more than death itself." The first gunshot shattered the quiet, echoing through the warehouse. Leo moved with fluid precision, using cover, advancing methodically. Each enemy was neutralized with calculated efficiency, some through direct confrontation, others incapacitated with silent strikes. Blood spattered the concrete, shadows danced under the harsh lights, and the metallic scent of gunfire filled the air. Marcus' men fell one by one, and Leo's focus never wavered. Finally, he faced Marcus alone, the two men standing amidst overturned crates, shattered glass, and spent cartridges. Marcus drew his weapon, a predatory grin etched across his features. "Did you really think Aria would just watch you bleed while you played hero?" Marcus sneered. Leo's reply was measured, almost cold. "Aria did what she had to do. Now, so will I." The ensuing confrontation was brutal, a combination of strategy and raw skill. Marcus fired, missed, and lunged. Leo countered, deflecting a blow and returning fire. Each movement was precise, the culmination of months of preparation, training, and sheer determination. When the dust settled, Marcus lay on the floor, lifeless, blood pooling beneath him. But victory came at a cost. Leo had been grazed multiple times. A bullet had lodged deep in his side. Another had torn through his shoulder. Each movement sent pain lancing through his body, but he ignored it. Knowing the mission was not yet complete, he navigated through the remaining crates to the control room, using the security systems to release the evidence Aria had collected. Files were transmitted anonymously to major media outlets, government watchdogs, and law enforcement. Argent Logistics' web of shell companies, illicit transfers, and hidden alliances was laid bare for the world to see. As the last file uploaded, a series of explosions rocked the warehouse. Leo's injuries slowed him, but he sprinted toward the exit, only to find the structural integrity compromised. The ceiling began to collapse, sparks flying from exposed electrical wiring. Smoke filled the air, and visibility dropped to mere feet. With every ounce of strength, he limped toward the nearest exit. The warehouse erupted behind him, fire consuming the structure in a roar that echoed across the docks. The city watched from afar, oblivious to the man who had become both savior and destroyer. Leo staggered out, barely conscious, collapsing as flames consumed the building behind him. In the minds of the public, and even in the news reports that followed, Leo Draven was dead. A casualty of his own war against betrayal and corruption. Thousands of miles away, in a small, anonymous apartment far from New York, Aria sat clutching Noah, her eyes glued to the television. News anchors spoke over aerial footage of the warehouse engulfed in flames. The camera pans revealed firefighters and emergency personnel, and in their reports, the phrase repeated itself. Authorities believe Leo Draven perished in the explosion. Aria's hands trembled as she pulled Noah closer. Tears streamed down her face, unrestrained, as grief, fear, and a sense of loss collided violently. She had hoped for survival, for a return, for an end that allowed them all to live. But the city had claimed him, or at least that was what everyone was led to believe. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to break. Sobbing, holding the boy she had grown to protect as fiercely as she had Leo, she felt the weight of solitude press down. She could no longer remain connected to the world they had fought to expose. The city of New York, with its shadows, betrayals, and ghosts, had to be left behind. Packing the essentials, Aria moved silently through the apartment, ensuring nothing tied her to the past remained. Noah watched her with wide, understanding eyes, sensing the gravity of departure without needing words. She whispered assurances, though her own heart trembled with uncertainty. "We'll be safe now. We'll start over, I promise." And so they left New York, disappearing into anonymity, untraceable and unseen. Aria assumed a new identity, living quietly in a small coastal town where no one knew her name, where the past could only whisper through fleeting memories. She found solace in the mundane, running a small bookstore, helping neighbors, walking along empty beaches with Noah. Moments of calm that had been impossible in the chaos of the city. Yet, in the quiet, the memory of Leo remained. Not as a man lost, but as a force that had reshaped her understanding of trust, loyalty, and courage. His choices, his sacrifices, and his relentless drive haunted her, a presence she carried silently. And though the world believed him dead, she clung to a fragile hope, born not of certainty, but of the knowledge that he had fought with everything he had to protect them. The wind off the ocean carried the faintest promise of change, of continuity beyond loss. Aria held Noah's hand, watching the waves crash against the shore, and for the first time in months, allowed herself to believe that life, though irrevocably altered, could continue. That even in the aftermath of betrayal, violence, and the collapse of empires, survival, and perhaps even peace, was possible. The city behind them was a world of fire, corruption, and exposure. The world ahead was uncertain, fragile yet free, and in that freedom, Aria found the faintest glimmer of hope, that Leo Draven, in some form, would live on in memory, in legacy, and in the lessons that had carried them both to this tenuous, quiet reprieve. The coastal town in Maine was quiet, its streets narrow and lined with weathered clapboard houses that had seen generations of wind and salt water. Waves crashed softly against the rocky shoreline, the sound mingling with the faint whistle of wind through the pines. It was the kind of place where time moved slowly, where secrets could hide in plain sight, and where a life could be rebuilt, layer by fragile layer. Aria moved through her small art studio, the scent of linseed oil and paint lingering in the air. Canvases leaned against walls, some finished, others still in the delicate chaos of creation. She traced the brush over a new piece, a stormy seascape, her hand steady though her mind wandered. The years had been generous in some ways, cruel in others. The city, the betrayals, the fires, and the blood, all of it belonged to another life, one she carried quietly but never fully left behind. Noah, now 15, sat at a corner desk near a window, surrounded by laptops and wires. His fingers danced across keyboards, coding small programs, tinkering with hardware, eyes bright with curiosity and focus. He had inherited both Aria's determination and the subtle intensity of Leo's mind. Occasionally he would glance at his mother, sensing the moments when her thoughts drifted into the past, and offer a small, understanding smile. The daily rhythms of their life had become comforting. Aria taught art classes to local children, hosted small exhibitions at the town gallery, and spent evenings helping Noah with his technological experiments. The town knew her as kind, quiet, and perhaps a bit distant. But no one could have guessed the storm that had shaped her, nor the man whose shadow still lingered in her memories. Yet the calm was fragile as the brittle winter branches against the stormy sky. On rainy days, Aria often found herself staring through the studio window at the darkening horizon, the relentless drizzle blurring the line between sea and sky. Her heart would tighten with the unspoken thought, what if he had survived? She had learned to let go, to accept the unknown, to protect herself and Noah from disappointment. Still, some part of her, buried deep beneath practicality and routine, held a quiet, enduring hope. Not a waiting, not an expectation, but a recognition that the world was unpredictable, and that life had a way of returning what it had taken away. It was on one such night, rain hammering against the roof, that the unexpected happened. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks echoed through the studio, cutting through the sound of the storm. Aria's heart stopped, a familiar rhythm igniting within her chest. She crossed the room, hesitation and anticipation warring within her. Through the rain-streaked glass of the door, she saw a figure, a shadow framed by the downpour. As she opened the door, the rain blurred her vision, and yet there was no mistaking him. Leo stood there, alive, soaked by the storm, a long scar running down his neck, a silent testament to survival and the battles fought alone. His gaze, intense yet tempered by time, met hers. "I told you not to wait," he said quietly, voice low but carrying the familiar edge of authority and care. Aria's breath caught. She shook her head slightly, tears beginning to form. "I didn't wait," she replied softly, voice trembling. I just couldn't forget." He stepped forward, the rain dripping from his coat onto the wooden threshold. His eyes scanned the studio, taking in the signs of life she had rebuilt, the canvases, the organized chaos, the small comforts of a life remade. "I've burned it all," he said, his tone carrying finality and relief. "Every connection, every trace of the network, every name erased. There is no Argent, no debts, no enemies, only this, only now." Aria swallowed hard, absorbing the weight of his words. After years of running, hiding, and surviving, the world that had once threatened to engulf them both had been erased. The man who had haunted her nightmares, who had saved her from death countless times, was standing in the doorway, offering not a threat, not a plan but presence. Noah, sensing the gravity of the moment, stepped forward cautiously. His eyes widened as he took in the man who had once seemed like a ghost in their lives. You're real," he whispered. Leo's eyes softened. "I am," he said simply, kneeling slightly to meet the boy's gaze. "I promised your mother I'd survive, and I intend to keep that promise. Both of you, you're my world now." Aria watched them, the weight of years pressing on her chest, tears streaming freely as she realized that the nightmare of the past had finally ended. She reached for Leo, their hands meeting in a familiar electric touch. No words were necessary. Everything unsaid, the fear, the trust, the long-standing connection, was present in that single moment. "I thought I had lost you," she admitted, voice breaking. I've waited for so long, not for hope, but for memory. And even then I was here," he interrupted gently, brushing her hair back from her face. "I had to disappear to survive, to erase everything that could threaten you, threaten Noah. But now it's only us." The storm outside raged, rain pelting the windows and wind rattling the wooden frame. Yet within the studio, a fragile warmth blossomed. Leo stepped fully inside, closing the door against the storm. His hand found hers again, fingers entwining with a natural familiarity born of shared trials and unspoken understanding. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he said, voice quiet but unwavering. "I'm asking for presence, for trust, for a chance to rebuild what we lost, not just what the world tried to take, but what we allowed fear to withhold from each other." Aria's lips curved into a faint, trembling smile. "Then we rebuild," she said simply, and without hesitation she drew him into an embrace, a kiss that spoke not of pity, not of obligation, but of recognition, understanding, and the quiet joy of reunion. Noah watched, a small, tentative smile breaking across his face. He understood, in his own way, that the world outside could be cruel, uncertain and unforgiving, but that here, in this small studio, they could finally exist without fear. Leo looked around the room once more, eyes landing on the canvases, on the sketches, on the life Aria had built in his absence. "You've done well," he said quietly, voice tinged with awe and admiration. "You've survived, protected him, protected yourself, and yet," he trailed off, reaching for the small box beside the desk. Inside were documents, notes, and careful plans for a future free from the shadows of the past. "You've lived," he finished, eyes meeting hers with a depth that no words could fully convey. Outside, the storm began to relent, rain turning to a gentle drizzle, the wind softening, waves lapping calmly against the shore. Inside, the three of them, Aria, Noah, and Leo, stood together, united not only by survival, but by the hard-earned understanding that the past, while present in memory and scars, no longer held dominion over their lives. "I thought the world had taken everything from us," Aria whispered, resting her head against his chest. "But we have each other, and we will protect it," Leo said firmly, fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his hand lingering on Noah's shoulder. "No shadows, no debts, no ghosts. Only this." The long scar on Leo's neck, the wounds that had once defined him, now seemed less a mark of violence and more a symbol of endurance. A testament to survival, to love, and to the fragile, enduring hope that even in a world defined by shadows, light could persist. For the first time in years, Aria felt entirely safe, entirely present, and entirely whole. And as the three of them looked out at the storm-cleared horizon, the quiet certainty settled in. Whatever the world had left to challenge them, they would face it together. This was no longer a story of fear, betrayal, or survival alone. It was a story of reclamation, of trust rebuilt, of life taken back from the darkness. And in that reclaimed life, there was only one truth. They were finally free, together, and unbreakable. The storm had passed, and so had the shadows. The rain fell softly against the studio windows, a gentle patter that filled the room with a steady, calming rhythm. Outside, The world was a blur of silver-gray light and shimmering droplets, each one tracing its path down the glass. Inside, the space was warm, filled with the scent of paint, varnish, and faint traces of wood smoke from the small heater Aria had left on. It was a quiet evening, one that promised nothing extraordinary, yet somehow felt monumental. Aria stood near the window, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her gaze distant as she watched the rain slide along the panes. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember every detail of the years that had led them here. The betrayals, the loss, the constant chase, and the nights spent waiting and fearing for a life that might never return. Leo sat in the worn leather armchair nearby, his posture relaxed but alert, his eyes following her movements with quiet intensity. The long scar on his neck caught the dim light, a reminder of battles fought and survived. His hands rested loosely on his knees, fingers tapping gently in rhythm with the rain outside. He said nothing, and neither did Aria. Words seemed unnecessary in the presence of shared history and hard-earned survival. Finally, Aria took a step forward. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, and then crossed the room. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him. It was not a gesture of pity, nor of obligation, nor even of immediate passion. It was a gesture of recognition, of relief, of trust forged in fire and shadow. Leo responded instantly, his arms encircling her. Holding her as if letting her go would undo the fragile equilibrium of the world he had fought so hard to reclaim. For long minutes, they stayed like that. Two people who had been shattered by life and by circumstance, now finding a measure of peace in each other's presence. Noah slept quietly in the corner on a small sofa, a blanket pulled up to his chin, the faintest smile playing at the corners of his lips as he listened to the gentle rhythm of the rain and their quiet breathing. Finally, Aria pulled back slightly, resting her head against Leo's shoulder. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the rain outside. "We made it," she whispered. Leo's reply was equally quiet, but firm, carrying the weight of everything he had survived. "Yes, we made it, finally." The two of them moved to the window seat, settling side by side. Aria rested her head on Leo's shoulder, and he draped an arm protectively around her. Outside, the rain continued, casting ripples across the small puddles forming along the windowsill. The world was silent, except for the steady patter of water, a lullaby for the battered and weary. Aria's eyes traced the droplets as they raced each other down the glass. She thought of the years of running, hiding, and surviving. She thought of the people they had lost, the shadows they had evaded, and the choices that had led them here. Her mind, so often clouded with worry and fear, was now quiet. She allowed herself to simply be present, to feel the warmth of Leo beside her, the gentle rise and fall of his breathing, the faint scent of rain and leather that always seemed to accompany him. After a long pause, she spoke again. This time her words meant not for him, but for the world that had shaped them. "The debt between us," she began, voice steady, "has never been about survival, or life itself. It was the debt of two people who had lost themselves, lost in fear, in grief, in choices they never wanted to make. And now, we've found our way back. We've found a way to live again." Leo shifted slightly, pressing his forehead gently against hers. His lips brushed her temple as he murmured, "And we'll keep living, Aria. Together. No shadows. No debts, just us." The room fell silent again except for the rain. It was a quiet, ordinary moment, yet it carried all the weight of extraordinary survival. The storms they had endured, both literal and figurative, had shaped them, scarred them, and ultimately strengthened them. Outside, the town slept beneath the soft gray sky, oblivious to the lives that had been irrevocably changed, yet somehow healed. Inside the studio, two people sat together, hearts still carrying the echoes of the past, but no longer chained to it. They were here, they were alive, and they were whole. Aria closed her eyes, letting the rain, the warmth, and Leo's presence envelop her. Noah stirred slightly in his sleep, murmuring a dream-bound word, and she smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Life had returned, fragile but tangible, And she knew, truly knew, that whatever the world might bring, they could face it together. The rain continued, a gentle rhythm against the glass, a song of renewal, of endings that were beginnings in disguise. Aria rested her head back on Leo's shoulder, finally letting go of the years of fear, of waiting, of uncertainty. In that quiet, sacred space, she understood the truth of their journey. The debt they had carried, the weight of loss, survival, and choice, was never about life or death. It was about reclaiming themselves. It was about the courage to live again, fully and without apology, in a world that had tried to steal everything from them. And at last, they had. They sat together in silence, watching the rain. And in that silence, there was everything. Love, trust, redemption, and the quiet, enduring joy of two people who had finally found their way back to each other. The storm had passed. The night was calm, and in the soft glow of the rain-soaked world, they were home. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming episodes or thrilling new stories. Your support is what keeps us going and helps us bring more amazing tales to life.